The Mercy Protocol, the medical frigate Asclepius, drifted through the Epsilon sector. Its hull painted pure white with massive green crosses visible from half a solar system away. Dr. James Rothman stood in the observation bay, watching the stars slide past as the ship maintained its station between two warring factions. He had been doing this work for 11 years now, ever since humanity had joined the galactic community and offered something most species found peculiar: unconditional medical care. James was 43 years old, with gray beginning to streak through his dark hair and permanent shadows under his eyes from too many double shifts. He wore the standard medical corps uniform, white with green trim, bearing the ancient symbol that had meant sanctuary for centuries on Earth. Behind him, the medical bay hummed with activity as nurses and doctors moved between beds holding patients from 6 different species. The Asclepius was not large by galactic standards. Only 800 meters from bow to stern, it carried a crew of 300 medical personnel and support staff. But within its corridors, humanity had built something the galaxy had never seen before: a hospital that treated everyone equally, regardless of which side of a conflict they fought on. The concept baffled most alien species, especially the Tarkonians. The Tarkonian Empire had been expanding through this sector for 40 years, absorbing smaller civilizations through overwhelming military force. They were a proud warrior culture, standing nearly 3 meters tall with 4 arms and chitinous gray skin that could deflect small arms fire. Their philosophy was simple: strength determined worth, and mercy was weakness waiting to be exploited. James walked through the recovery ward, checking on the day's patients. In bed 7, a Tarkonian soldier named Kreth lay recovering from combat injuries sustained in a skirmish 2 days prior. His secondary arms had been badly burned, and infection had set in before his own people bothered to retrieve him from the battlefield. The Asclepius had picked him up along with enemy wounded, brought them aboard, and treated them all. Kreth's vertical pupils tracked James as he approached. The Tarkonian's face was unreadable by human standards, but James had learned to read the subtle shifts in their posture. Confusion, mostly. These warriors simply could not understand why humans would save them. "Your arm is healing well," James said, checking the regeneration sleeve covering Kreth's burned limb. "The infection is responding to treatment. You should have full mobility back in another week." Kreth made a clicking sound deep in his throat. "Why?" The universal translator rendered his question in accented English. "My people would have left you to die." "We do not understand this, Mercy." James had heard this question hundreds of times. He gave the same answer he always gave: because everyone deserves medical care. Pain is pain regardless of who you are or what side you fight for. But we are enemies of your allies. We have killed those you protect. That's not my concern. I'm a doctor, not a soldier. My job is to heal, not to judge. Kreth fell silent, his alien mind struggling with the concept. James moved on to the next patient. A small furred creature from the Velen Coalition, one of the species the Tarkonians were currently trying to conquer. She had lost a leg in an orbital bombardment. The Asclepius had fitted her with a prosthetic, and she would walk again. Lieutenant Sarah Morrison approached James in the corridor outside the ward. She was the ship's chief surgical nurse, 32 years old, with red hair pulled back in a tight bun and sharp green eyes that missed nothing. She carried a data tablet and looked worried. "Dr. Rothman, we need to talk about the supply situation," she said quietly. "We're running low on broad-spectrum antibiotics and synthetic blood plasma. The resupply ship isn't due for another 6 days." James frowned. "Can we stretch what we have? If we don't get any mass casualty events, maybe. But if another major battle breaks out..." She didn't need to finish the thought. "Do what you can. I'll send another request to command, see if they can expedite the supply run." Sarah nodded and walked away, her boots clicking on the metal deck plates. James watched her go, feeling the familiar weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. Every decision on the Asclepius meant life or death, and they were always one emergency away from running out of something critical. The ship's intercom crackled to life. "Dr. Rothman to the bridge. Dr. Rothman to the bridge." James made his way through the corridors, nodding to crew members as he passed. The Asclepius had become home to all of them, a small island of healing in a galaxy that seemed determined to tear itself apart. When he reached the bridge, Captain Michelle Park was standing at the tactical display, her dark eyes fixed on something that made her jaw tight. Captain Park was a veteran of Earth's colonial defense forces, 51 years old, with short black hair and the kind of calm authority that came from 3 decades of command experience. She had volunteered for the medical corps after her daughter became a nurse, wanting to be part of humanity's peaceful mission to the stars. "Captain?" James asked. Park gestured to the display. "We have 3 Tarkonian warships on approach vectors. Fast attack cruisers moving at combat speed." James felt his stomach drop. "Have you hailed them? Transmitted our protected status?" "Continuously for the last 20 minutes. They're not responding." This was unusual. The Tarkonians might not respect humanity's medical neutrality, but they had always acknowledged it. Their wounded needed treatment too, and even their warrior culture understood the practical value of a hospital ship that would treat their soldiers. "What about the transponder?" James asked. "Is it broadcasting our registry?" "Full power on all frequencies. They know exactly who we are." The tactical officer, Lieutenant Chen, looked up from his console. "Sir, they're spreading out into attack formation." James and Captain Park exchanged glances. This was wrong. Something was very wrong. "Raise shields," Park ordered. "All hands to emergency stations." "This is not a drill." Alarms began to wail throughout the ship. James could hear the crew responding, moving to their designated positions with practiced efficiency. But the Asclepius was not built for combat. Its shields were designed to stop micrometeorites and radiation, not military-grade weapons. It had no offensive capabilities whatsoever. "Still trying to hail them," the communications officer reported. No response. Captain Park's voice was steady as she activated the ship-wide intercom. "This is the captain. All medical staff, begin emergency patient stabilization protocols. Prepare for possible evacuation. All non-essential personnel to escape pod stations." James started to leave the bridge, but Park caught his arm. "Stay. If this goes bad, I need you here to help coordinate patient evacuation." On the tactical display, the 3 Tarkonian warships had formed a perfect triangle around the Asclepius. It was a classic kill-box formation. James had seen enough military briefings to recognize it. "One more time," Park said to communications. "Send everything. Our registry, our patient manifest, our protected status under every interstellar convention. Show them we're treating their wounded." The message went out. James watched the chronometer tick away seconds. 5, 10, 15. Then the response came, transmitted in clear English so there would be no misunderstanding. The voice was deep, mechanical, filtered through a Tarkonian translator. "Humanity's weakness spreads like disease through the galaxy. You teach our enemies that there is mercy in war. You teach them softness. This ends now. Incoming fire." Lieutenant Chen shouted. The first impact hit the Asclepius on the starboard side. The explosion tore through the outer hull and into Medical Bay 3. James was thrown against a bulkhead as the ship shuddered. Lights flickered. Somewhere deep in the ship, people were screaming, "Return fire!" Someone shouted, but Captain Park's voice cut through the chaos. "We have no weapons. Helm, evasive maneuvers. Get us out of here!" But the Asclepius was a medical frigate, not a warship. It was designed for stability and comfort, not speed or maneuverability. The helm officer did his best, but they were trapped in the kill box. Another blast struck the engine section. James felt the artificial gravity stutter and fail for 3 terrible seconds before emergency systems restored it. On the damage control display, entire sections of the ship were turning red. "Hull breaches on decks 4 through 7, the damage control officer reported. "We're venting atmosphere. Emergency bulkheads are sealing, but we have people trapped." James activated his communicator. "All medical teams report status." The responses came back in fragments. Medical Bay 3 was gone, completely destroyed in the first attack. Medical Bay 2 was intact but cut off by hull breaches. The surgical suites were damaged but functional. They had casualties, but the crew was doing their best to help. A third explosion rocked the ship. This one hit the crew quarters. James thought of Sarah Morrison, of the hundreds of doctors and nurses who had devoted their lives to healing. How many of them had just died? "Escape pods," Captain Park said, her voice tight with controlled fury. "Order all non-essential personnel to the pods. Medical staff, take as many patients as you can carry. We have to abandon ship." James ran from the bridge. The corridors were chaos, filled with smoke and injured crew members. He found Sarah in Medical Bay 1, trying to help patients to their feet. Many of the wounded couldn't walk. The Tarkonian soldier Kreth was using his forearms to carry a small Velen patient, his own injuries forgotten. "Move. Everyone move." James shouted. "Get to the escape pods!" They stumbled through the damaged corridors, following emergency lighting to the pod bay. James counted heads as they went. They had started with 63 patients in the bays.
He could see maybe 40 with them now.
The rest were dead or trapped in sealed sections. An explosion from somewhere aft made the entire ship groan. The Asclepius was dying, and the Tarkonian warships kept firing, methodically tearing apart a defenseless hospital ship. They reached Escape Pod Bay 2. Crew members were loading patients as fast as they could, cramming people into pods designed for 8, sometimes fitting 12 or 15. James helped a burned Velen engineer into a pod, then turned to help Sarah with another patient. "Doctor," someone shouted. "Pod Bay 1 is gone." They shot it. "They're targeting the escape pods." James felt ice flood his veins. This wasn't just an attack. This was murder. This was genocide. "Launch as many pods as we can." Captain Park's voice came over the intercom. "All pods, scatter pattern, maximum thrust. Don't group up. It's your only chance." The escape pod bay began launching. One by one, the small craft shot away from the dying Asclepius, scattering in all directions. James watched through a viewport as the Tarkonian warships tracked them with weapons. Energy beams lanced out, catching pods one by one. Each beam meant 8 to 15 people dead. Sarah grabbed James's arm. "Our pod, now!" They crammed into Escape Pod 7 with 16 other people. 3 doctors, 5 nurses, 4 engineers, 2 medical technicians, Kreth the Tarkonian soldier, and a young Velen child who wouldn't stop crying. The pod systems were screaming warnings about being over capacity, but someone slapped the launch button anyway. The pod shot away from the Asclepius with crushing acceleration. Through the small viewport, James watched his ship, his home for 11 years, break apart. A massive explosion tore through the central section, and the Asclepius folded in on itself like paper in a fire. 800 meters of corridors and wards, operating rooms and recovery units, all the places where they had saved thousands of lives. Gone. The pod tumbled through space, its tiny engine sputtering. They had launched at a bad angle, spinning wildly. Someone managed to shut down the main engine before it burned out completely, leaving them drifting with minimal power. "Stay quiet," Sarah whispered. "Shut down everything non-essential. If we're lucky, they'll think we're just debris." They floated in darkness and silence, pressed against each other in the tiny pod. Through the viewport, James watched the Tarkonian warships hunt the other escape pods. Beams of energy lit up the darkness, and each flash meant more of his crew was dead. He counted launches in his head. The Asclepius had 60 escape pods. He had seen at least 40 launch. The Tarkonian ships destroyed 39 of them. Only one pod had escaped. Only their pod, and only because their engine had failed at launch, sending them tumbling away at an unpredictable angle. 16 people. Out of 300 crew and 63 patients, 16 people had survived. James looked around the cramped pod at the faces of his remaining crew. Sarah Morrison, her face streaked with soot and tears. Kreth the Tarkonian soldier, holding the small Velen child who had finally cried herself to sleep. Engineers and nurses he had worked with for years, all of them staring at nothing, trying to process what had just happened. They drifted for 9 days. The escape pod's life support was designed for 8 people for 5 days. With 16, the air grew thick and stale within hours. They rationed the emergency water and food packets. They took turns going into induced hypothermia to reduce oxygen consumption. On the 9th day, a patrol ship from the Velen coalition found them. The captain, a grizzled veteran named Torth, looked sick when he opened the pod and saw how few had survived. 16, he said, his voice barely a whisper. Only 16. "By the ancestors, what have they done?" The patrol ship brought them to the nearest human outpost, a listening station called Gibraltar Point. By the time they arrived, the entire galaxy knew what had happened. The Tarkonian Empire had destroyed a hospital ship. They had murdered medical personnel. They had hunted escape pods like prey. James expected outrage. He expected the Galactic Council to respond with fury. Instead, he found careful diplomatic language. Regrettable incident. Violation of protocols. Formal protests. But no real condemnation. No consequences the galaxy didn't understand. To them, the Asclepius was just another ship. The 300 dead were just another casualty figure. They didn't grasp that something fundamental had been broken, but humans understood. Earth's government called an emergency session of the World Council, something that had only happened twice in human history. Every nation, every colony, every human settlement watched the footage from Escape Pod 7's recorder. They watched the Asclepius break apart. They heard the Tarkonian commander's words about mercy being a disease. James was brought to Earth to testify. He stood before the World Council, still wearing his torn medical uniform, and told them everything. When he finished, the chamber was silent for a long moment. Then Earth's Prime Minister, an elderly woman named Catherine Wells, spoke. Her voice was quiet, but it carried through the chamber and across every human world. They have shown us what they think of mercy. Very well. We will show them why we invented rules for war in the first place. The first sign of humanity's response was silence. Every human hospital ship in the galaxy received the same order: return home immediately. Every medical volunteer was recalled. Every humanitarian mission shut down overnight. Species that had grown dependent on human medicine suddenly found themselves without help. Protests came from across the galaxy. How dare humans abandon their responsibilities? Where was their famous compassion now? Earth's response was brief and final: services suspended indefinitely. Behind that silence, humanity moved. James saw it happening at Gibraltar Point. Civilian ships stopped arriving. Military transports took their place, carrying soldiers and weapons. The listening station became a forward operating base. Supply depot became armories. The Tarkonian Empire's propaganda broadcasts mocked humanity's withdrawal. The soft species was hiding, they said. The disease of mercy had been purged, and now the patients cowered in their hospitals. But 3 months after the Asclepius fell, the galaxy would learn that humanity's silence had not been fear. It had been preparation. James stood in Gibraltar Point's observation deck and watched military ships gather in the darkness. Thousands of them, pulled from every human colony and settlement. Above him, crews were converting civilian freighters into carriers, installing weapons, adding armor. Humanity was mobilizing for war, and this time there would be no mercy in it. Commander Lisa Zhao found him there. She was a military officer, 38 years old, with cold eyes and a scar across her left cheek from some old conflict. She had lost a brother on the Asclepius, a surgical technician named David. Dr. Rothman, she said formally, the Fleet Command wants you to join the task force. They need someone who understands what we're fighting for, someone who can remind us why we're doing this. James looked at her. What are we doing? Zhao's expression was ice. We're teaching the Tarkonians a lesson that every human child learns in school. We're showing them why we made rules for war after we'd done terrible things. We're demonstrating what happens when you destroy the one thing keeping monsters like us in check. And what's that? Our mercy, Doctor. They killed our mercy. Now they'll learn what we were protecting them from. James thought of the Asclepius. He thought of Sarah and the crew, of the 300 people who had died trying to heal the galaxy's wounded. He thought of Kreth, the Tarkonian soldier, who had carried a Velen child to safety even as his own people murdered everyone around him. I'll go, James said quietly. But when this is over, we rebuild. We go back to healing. We prove that mercy isn't weakness. Zhao nodded slowly. First, we show them the cost of destroying it. Then yes, we heal again, but they need to understand why that healing was precious. In the darkness beyond Gibraltar Point, the human fleet continued to gather, 3,000 ships and more coming every day. The largest military force humanity had ever assembled. All of it pointed at one target. The Tarkonian Empire had attacked the Red Cross. Now they would learn what the Red Cross had been protecting them from. When mercy becomes memory, the human fleet materialized at the edge of the Tarkonian home system like a swarm of angry hornets. 3,000 ships dropped out of faster-than-light travel in perfect synchronization, their arrival timed to the millisecond. On the command carrier Beijing, Dr. James Rothman stood in the observation gallery and watched the target system appear on the massive display screens. Tarkonis Prime hung in space like a blue marble, home to 58 billion Tarkonians. Cities sprawled across every continent, their lights visible even from this distance. Orbital stations dotted the space around it like a crown of steel and glass. And beyond the planet, massive and gray, hung Tarkonis Major, the moon that served as the Empire's military headquarters. James had not slept properly in 3 months. He had spent that time working with military planners, helping them understand humanity's rules of war and why those rules mattered. Now, wearing a military observer's uniform instead of his medical whites, he watched as humanity prepared to teach the galaxy's most brutal empire a lesson in consequences. Fleet Admiral Marcus Chen stood at the tactical station, his weathered face illuminated by the glow of status displays. Chen was 62 years old, a veteran of the colony wars who had come out of retirement for this mission. His gray hair was cut military short, and his dark eyes held the kind of cold calculation that came from decades of strategic command. Tarkonian fleet responding, the tactical officer announced. Initial count shows 1,400 warships, multiple fleet groups converging on our position from defensive stations. Chen nodded slowly, his expression unchanged, right on schedule. They're doing exactly what the simulation predicted. All fleet groups maintain formation delta. Begin the approach at 0.3 light speed. The human fleet moved forward as a single entity, a wall of ships advancing into Tarkonian space. James watched the distance counter tick down on the displays. 10 million kilometers. 5 million. 1 million. The gap between the fleets shrank with every passing second. Commander Lisa Zhao appeared at James's side. She wore full combat gear, her scar visible in the harsh lighting. "This is it, Doctor. Everything we've prepared for." James didn't respond. He was thinking about the Asclepius, about the 300 people who had died because they tried to show mercy. He was thinking about what was about to happen and whether any of this would bring them back. The Tarkonian fleet reached optimal firing range first. At 200,000 kilometers, their energy weapons opened up, sending beams of concentrated destruction across the void toward the human formation. The first impacts registered immediately. 2 converted freighters took heavy damage. One exploded in a flash of light and superheated metal, its crew of 90 gone in an instant. "Return fire," Admiral Chen ordered, his voice calm and measured. "All railgun batteries target the approaching cruisers. Fire at will." Humanity's kinetic weapons spoke. Solid projectiles, each one weighing several tons, accelerated to a fraction of light speed and crossed the distance in seconds. They hit the Tarkonian shields with tremendous force, and several enemy ships staggered under the impact. The Tarkonians had always laughed at humanity's primitive kinetic weapons, calling them outdated and inefficient compared to energy weapons. They stopped laughing when those projectiles started punching through their shields and tearing through their armor like paper. But this opening exchange was just a feint. The real battle plan was about to begin. "All ships execute Phase 2, Chen announced. "Ignore the enemy fleet. All weapons, all missiles, all firepower concentrates on Tarkonis Major. Target the military installations, command centers, and defensive platforms." James held his breath. This was the moment that would define everything. The human fleet simply stopped engaging the Tarkonian warships. Every ship, every weapon system, every missile battery redirected its fire toward the moon. 3,000 ships firing simultaneously at a single target. The effect on the Tarkonian fleet was immediate and profound. Their tactical doctrine had no answer for this. An enemy that ignored you to attack a secondary target made no sense by their understanding of warfare. You destroyed the threat first, then secured objectives. That was how civilized warfare worked. But humanity wasn't fighting a civilized war. "Tarkonian fleet is breaking formation," the tactical officer reported. "Multiple groups attempting to intercept our attacks on Tarkonis Major. Their command structure appears confused." "Good," Chen said. "That's exactly what we want. They have to choose between destroying us or defending their headquarters. Let's see what they value more." The Tarkonian commanders chose the moon. They had to. Tarkonis Major housed 40 million civilians, most of them family members of military personnel. It held the Empire's strategic planning centers, their fleet command, their military academies. Everything that made the Tarkonian Empire function as a military power lived on that moon, watching them abandon their attack formation to defend. Tarkonis Major was like watching a chess player sacrifice their queen to save their king. It was tactically sound but strategically devastating. "Launch fighter wings," Chen ordered. "All carriers deploy. Target any Tarkonian ships that get within weapons range of our main fleet. Everyone else keeps hitting the moon." From the converted carriers scattered throughout the human fleet, fighter craft poured into space. Small, fast ships crewed by pilots who had trained specifically for this mission. Their orders were simple: harass, distract, and keep the Tarkonian fleet too busy to mount an organized counterattack. James watched the battle unfold on the tactical displays. He couldn't understand all the military terminology and formations, but he could see the pattern. The Tarkonians were trying to fight the kind of battle they knew, the kind they had won 1,000 times before. The humans were fighting something entirely different. Missiles began impacting Tarkonis Major's shields. The moon had powerful defenses, designed to withstand assaults from multiple enemy fleets. But those defenses were never meant to face 3,000. Ships firing everything they had in a concentrated bombardment that refused to stop. Tarkonis Major shields, fluctuating, the tactical officer reported. They're trying to redistribute power, but the coverage is too broad. We're overwhelming their capacity. Strike teams, prepare for insertion, Chen said. Wing commanders, you are go for attack run. James knew what was coming next. He had helped plan it, though the memory made him feel sick. Commander Zhao led a squadron of heavily modified fighters, each one carrying specialized payloads designed by Earth's best military engineers. The mission was surgical, precise, and absolutely devastating in its implications. Shields down in Sector 9. Tactical called out.
Window opening for 4 minutes. All strike wings, you have your go, Chen said.
Execute Operation Dark Moon. Zhao's voice came over the command channel, steady despite the chaos around her. Strike leader to all wings. Follow my lead. Stay tight. Deliver payloads and get clear. James watched the fighter squadron dive toward Tarkonis Major. Tarkonian defensive platforms tracked them immediately, but the human fleet kept those platforms busy with sustained fire. Half of Zhao's squadron died in the first 15 seconds. Energy beams caught them, reduced them to expanding clouds of debris. But the rest made it through. 20 fighters reached the moon's surface and released their payloads. Not bombs, not nuclear weapons, something much more insidious. Electromagnetic pulse devices wrapped around seismic charges, designed to penetrate deep into the moon's infrastructure before detonating. The charges hit simultaneously across Tarkonis Major. Each one targeted a critical system, power distribution networks, communication hubs, military command facilities, defensive coordination centers. The conventional explosives were almost secondary. What mattered was the electromagnetic pulse that spread through every circuit, every power line, every computer system on the moon. In less than 5 seconds, a moon that housed 40 million people and served as the nerve center of an interstellar empire went completely dark. Every light went out. Every power grid failed. Every communication system shut down. Every life support system in the sealed military installation stopped functioning. The effect on the Tarkonian fleet was catastrophic. Individual ships kept fighting, but the unified command structure was gone. Ship captains couldn't talk to each other, couldn't receive orders, couldn't coordinate their movements. The Tarkonian Empire's greatest strength, their rigid military hierarchy, became their greatest weakness, and worse, far worse. Every commander in that fleet knew what was happening on Tarkonis Major right now. Their families were down there. Their children, their mates, their parents. 40 million people suddenly without power, without life support, without heat in the sections of underground military bunkers where temperatures would drop below freezing in minutes. People were dying. Their people, their families. Tarkonian fleet breaking off, the tactical officer reported. All groups moving to defensive positions around Tarkonis Major. They're abandoning the attack. Admiral Chen watched his display for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of deliberate choice. All ships hold position. Cease fire on the moon. Maintain weapons lock on both the planet and Tarkonis Major, but do not engage. Let them see we could finish this. The human fleet stopped firing. They held position just outside the Tarkonian defensive perimeter, weapons still charged and ready but silent. The message was clear. We could destroy you right now while you're disorganized and desperate. We choose not to. Open a channel, Chen ordered. All frequencies, maximum broadcast, every language in the Tarkonian database. The communications officer worked quickly. Channel open, Admiral. You're broadcasting across the entire system. Chen's voice went out across the void, transmitted on every frequency, translated into every language. Tarkonian forces, this is Fleet Admiral Marcus Chen of the Earth Defense Fleet. We could finish this battle right now. Your fleet is disorganized. Your command structure is shattered. Your families on Tarkonis Major are dying as their life support fails. James listened to Chen's words and felt something cold settle in his chest. This was the moment. This was when humanity showed the galaxy what total war really meant. We could destroy your defensive fleet while it scrambles to help your families, Chen continued. We could watch everyone on Tarkonis Major suffocate as their oxygen runs out. We could hunt down every escape pod that launches, just like you did to the Asclepius. We could show no mercy just as you showed none. Chen paused, letting the words sink in across the entire Tarkonian system. But we won't. Because we are not you. We remember what mercy means. We remember why our ancestors created rules for warfare after they had done terrible things. We remember what happens when civilized beings forget those rules. The bridge was silent except for the quiet hum of electronics. Every eye was on Admiral Chen. Instead, we offer terms. 3 demands, non-negotiable. First, the 3 Tarkonian commanders who ordered the attack on the Asclepius will surrender themselves to stand trial under human law. Second, the Tarkonian Empire will ratify and enforce the Galactic Medical Neutrality Act, with provisions for inspection and verification. Third, reparations will be paid to fund hospital ships for every species in this sector, with protected status enforced by Mutual Defense Pact. James closed his eyes. The terms were harsh but not impossible. They demanded justice without genocide, accountability without annihilation. You have 1 hour to respond, Chen said. For every minute past that deadline, we will destroy 1 orbital platform around Tarkonis Prime. We will not restore power to Tarkonis Major until you agree to terms. Your people have approximately 4 hours of emergency oxygen remaining. Choose wisely. Choose whether your pride is worth more than their lives. The channel closed. The human fleet waited. James found himself standing next to Kreth, the Tarkonian soldier who had survived the Asclepius. Kreth had insisted on coming with the fleet, had volunteered to serve as a cultural advisor. Now he stared at the dark moon, where his species' military headquarters had gone silent. My clutch sister serves on Tarkonis Major, Kreth said quietly, his forearms hanging limp at his sides. Her offspring are there. 3 younglings, not yet mature. I know, James said. That's why we're giving your commanders a choice. That's why we're not just destroying everything and everyone. Why? Kreth asked, the same question he had asked on the Asclepius. Why show mercy to us after what we did to you? James looked at the Tarkonian soldier, this alien warrior who had carried a Velen child to safety, even as his own people murdered everyone around them. Because that's who we are. We made rules for war after we'd broken them. We learned what happens when you throw away mercy and restraint. We became monsters once and we made sure we'd never forget what that cost us. But you could destroy us. Your fleet could wipe out this entire system. Yes, we could. That's the point. We're showing you what we're capable of when we take off the restraints. And then we're showing you why we put those restraints on in the first place. 47 minutes after Admiral Chen's ultimatum, the Tarkonian Empire responded. The transmission came from one of the surviving communication satellites patched through emergency power systems. Earth Fleet, this is Grand Marshal Theron of the Tarkonian High Command. We acknowledge your terms. We request immediate restoration of power to Tarkonis Major to prevent further civilian casualties. The 3 commanders responsible for the attack on your hospital ship will surrender themselves within the day. We will ratify the Medical Neutrality Act and pay the required reparations. The bridge crew remained silent, waiting for Admiral Chen's response. Grand Marshal Theron, Chen said, we will restore power to Tarkonis Major's life support systems immediately. Full power restoration will occur in stages as you comply with the terms. The commanders will surrender to neutral custody at the designated coordinates. Negotiations for the full treaty will begin within 48 hours. Chen gestured to his engineering officer. Send the power restoration codes to Tarkonis Major. Prioritize life support, medical facilities, and civilian sectors. Military systems stay dark until we have compliance on all terms. The engineering teams went to work. Within minutes, lights began flickering back on across Tarkonis Major. Not everywhere, not all at once, but enough. Enough to save the 40 million people who had been dying in the darkness. James watched it happen and felt tears on his face. They had done it. They had shown overwhelming force, demonstrated the capacity for total destruction, and then chosen restraint. They had taught the galaxy a lesson about humanity that no amount of hospital ships could have conveyed. Mercy backed by the willingness to destroy was not weakness. It was the most terrifying form of strength. Over the next 6 days, the Tarkonian Empire complied with every demand. The 3 commanders surrendered. Treaties were signed. Reparations were agreed upon. The Galactic Medical Neutrality Act was ratified with enforcement provisions that carried real consequences. And across the galaxy, other species watched and learned. Humanity would heal your wounded without question. Humanity would show mercy even to enemies. But if you attacked those who healed, if you turned mercy into a weapon, humanity would demonstrate exactly why they had created rules for war. Because humans knew what they were capable of when they stopped following those rules. 6 months after the Asclepius fell, James Rothman stood in a shipyard above Earth and watched the construction of a new hospital ship. They were calling it the Asclepius II, and it was larger than the original, better equipped, more capable. Commander Zhao stood beside him, her military uniform replaced by the white and green of the medical corps. She had volunteered to serve on the new ship, had given up her military career to become a nurse. Her brother David would have approved. "Do you think they'll attack us again?" Zhao asked. James shook his head. "No, they understand now. They understand that our mercy isn't weakness and our hospital ships aren't targets. They're warnings. They're reminders of what we could do if we chose to abandon the rules we made for ourselves. And if someone forgets, if another species decides to test us, then we'll teach them the same lesson. We'll show overwhelming force, demonstrate our capacity for destruction, and then show them why we choose restraint. We'll prove that mercy backed by strength is the most powerful force in the galaxy." The Asclepius II was nearly complete, its white hull gleaming in the light of Earth's sun. Soon it would launch, would carry doctors and nurses back into the war zones and disaster areas where they were needed. It would treat everyone equally, show mercy to all who needed healing, and everyone in the galaxy would know that attacking any human medical ship, would bring consequences beyond imagination. The Red Cross still meant sanctuary. But now the galaxy understood what that sanctuary cost, and why it must never be violated again. James had lost 300 colleagues, 300 friends, 300 people who dedicated their lives to healing. But their deaths had not been meaningless. Their sacrifice had created something new, a galaxy where mercy was not just hoped for but guaranteed. Protected not by treaties alone but by the demonstrated willingness to destroy anyone who violated that protection. "Let's go to work," James said to Zhao. "There are people out there who need help, and now we can help them knowing they'll be safe while we do it." Together, they walked toward the shuttle that would take them to the Asclepius II. Behind them, Earth hung in space, the world that had given the galaxy the gift of medicine and the lesson of consequences. Humanity had shown the stars what they could do. Now they would show them who they chose to be.